Mozart has been such a focus for me for the last 10 to 15 years, and that was very deliberate on my part when Harmonia Mundi approached me about recording the complete Mozart. Well, in fact, I approached them after Volume 1. I was very attracted by the idea of spending so much time with one composer. In recording and then in concerts to tour the recording programs that had just been released, I think it's a very healthy, very enriching way of getting to know a composer. But what was clear to me was that Mozart, of course, has always been one of my great loves, but what people might not know is that Bach has also been a deep part of my upbringing as a harpsichordist, and really as a teenager getting to know the vocal orchestral music intimately from recording. So as you say, now it really is time, it's time for Bach. I think Bach is a very kind of elusive, sort of ephemeral character. On the one hand, we have this picture of him from the Haussmann portraits of this kind of very serious, stern-looking person who's kind of looking down on you and judging your counterpoint. On the other hand, we know of his upbringing, his kind of milieu, the sort of strong connection to the land and the earth, Bach's very kind of rustic country side of his personality as well. He was an irascible person, very quick to anger, very difficult to please, this person. Of course, piecing Bach's life together is unbelievably difficult in comparison to Mozart. And of course, we haven't yet had the kind of majorly successful Hollywood film about Bach's life as we have with Mozart's. And that, combined with Mozart's letters, which is a sort of treasure trove of really detailed information, not about him, just about him as a person, but his ideas of music, his colleagues, how to put a project together, like with Idomeneo. So in answer to your question, it's much harder to connect to Bach, the person. But indeed, I think that is the sort of quest that we should be on as Bach interpreters, is to re-inject this music with a kind of more flesh and blood approach. This is the antithesis of the kind of abstract music that we find in the Art of Fugue, like these harpsichord concertos, for example, or any of the cantatas. But yes, it's harder to find him, it's harder to grasp onto him as a person. That is the challenge with Bach. Oh goodness, that's a deep, big question. This idea of what sort of path a composer goes down depending on their employment and what sort of employment they have, that's a really tough one to answer. The answer is definitely yes, it has an enormous impact on the decisions they make. I mean, you bring up Mozart, and of course that's one of the most heartbreaking cases, I think, of the 18th century, in the sense that this is arguably the most gifted composer of the late 18th century. And somehow he just misfired the whole time in his career. He wanted a really big opera contract, it never happened. I think he was sidelined because he was probably an arrogant, very demanding person. With Bach, it's a bit more curious because he has a couple of positions along the way that are, we understand, the source of such joy, both personally and professionally. I mean, his time in Cöthen apparently was such a wonderful period. So it's tricky to know why someone like Bach decides to leave, but I think deep down, he realizes that his legacy is going to be a body of choral orchestral music, essentially. The cantatas, the B minor Mass, and the two Passions, and the others that are lost. And I think very deep in his person, Bach knows that a court position, like in Cöthen, where he's just essentially writing instrumental music for the rest of his career, is not going to challenge him enough. And I think that you see with Mozart as well, who gets a kind of nominal position in the 1780s as a composer of dance music for the court. But Mozart is desperate to write operas, and I think for Bach it's true that he needs to sink his teeth into a massive cycle of church cantatas and the Passions and the B minor Mass. And I think this is the music that comes to define arguably his greatest legacy in a certain sense. I mean, please don't get me wrong, the keyboard music is of course of such importance, but the kind of light years ahead of its time music that we see in the Matthew Passion, John Passion, and the B minor Mass, that's music that Bach can only really conceive given the new requirements that he has in Leipzig. So I think they were very very choosy about what they wanted and what served them the best. But of course, unlike Haydn and Beethoven, as you also cite, they are also struggling under the conditions of the time, which means that they have to have permanent deployment, which is a bit of an anchor for them as well, in a sense. Look, these harpsichord concertos of Bach are a very particular, very charming, sort of unusual portion of the repertoire. It's very clear that Bach is a person who brings the keyboard concerto to a whole new level and sort of arguably invents it overnight with Brandenburg 5, which is a slightly earlier piece than the ones we're doing in a program like this. What is very clear is that Bach needs to reuse certain music in order to make new pieces, and essentially he takes both of the famous violin concertos and transcribes them for harpsichord. This is music for friends, it's music for cherished colleagues, it's music for the Kaffeehaus Zimmermann in Leipzig. It's really not public music in a sense. So one has to treat them like really pieces of echt chamber music, and that's why we've chosen to perform them with only 5 strings rather than an orchestra. I think Bach is giving music to his colleagues and friends and sons to play as a way to get to know the style and sound even better. And of course, as with everything he does, he goes so many steps further in the way he conceptualizes a new sound of the concerto literature. And you can see that he takes the violin versions and enriches them with incredibly rich filigree in the harpsichord, ornaments, scales, running notes, different types of arpeggio formulations, very creative. So I think in a certain way they become almost a new revised version of both pieces, in a sense. This is in stark contrast, of course, to the cantatas, where you can see Bach kind of sharpening his knife, cutting his teeth into something that's going to set him up for the St. John Passion. I mean, this is highly dramatized, vivid, epic music with colors, instrumental colors of such modernity. These are pieces, the cantatas, that really are exploring unheard of territory, in the sense that you have everything like the Passions, from chorale fantasias, big choruses with one and a part singers, as we'll be doing, delicate, anguished solo arias for solo flute, continuo and tenor, chorales, of course, at the end of each cantata, duets as well, a whole kind of landscape of textures and genres, which of course sets up the shape that you have in some of the Passions. The concertos and the cantatas, I think, fit very well together because the harpsichord concertos are very, kind of in a sense, in a positive sense of the term, kind of Gebrauchsmusik. It's very music really designed for a certain purpose, a collegial chamber music setting. The cantatas, of course, are essays in kind of almost operatic drama at times, but they work very well together, I find, in context. The decision to go more and more in the direction of play conduct is one I welcome with open arms. It wasn't so clear to me, I'd say 10 years ago. I was much more trepidatious, a bit more nervous about it, but 2 things really inspired me in that department. One of them was a letter from Mozart where I think he writes to his father and he says that he had stopped playing in the performances of Entführung in Vienna, and he went to one of them and said, it's way too slow. They've really forgotten the fire and spirit of this. I need to get back in there and play continuo with them in order to reinvigorate things again. Now, Entführung is a Singspiel. There's no recitative. There's no part for a continuo instrument. So Mozart was just there playing along with them. We know that Bach directed BWV 198, the Trauerorder, from the harpsichord. And my feeling about kind of etching out a new path in my career right now, it's a sort of mixed metaphor, but I think you understand what I mean. Bach was directing these pieces from the harpsichord. We know that this is one of the most gifted continuo players of his generation. How did that sound? It would be such hubris to even suggest that we can get close, but I want to direct a Matthäus Passion and a Johannes Passion from the harpsichord, playing and directing, because I think it's a very different color for the ensemble, for the recitative as well, to include the harpsichord as much more a part of the sonic landscape of those pieces, and to really play with the orchestra and the singers in a reduced version maybe of 10 to 12 singers. But this is a sound and a kind of energy and a complicity, a chamber music feeling to that repertoire we don't have to say that it's better than with a chorus of 30, but it's just different, and it provides new perspectives of clarity and incision that I think are so welcome in this music. And let's face it, there's never going to be a time when we don't want to hear 5 different versions of the Johannespassion, and why not have the chance to experience a harpsichord-led version of those pieces with a smaller ensemble as a way to, as it were, get into the heart of the piece from a more chamber music perspective. And I think that's a very welcome addition to the landscape of Bach interpretation right now.